From Social Prosperity Partners, this is Community Catalysts. Welcome to Community Catalysts, the podcast that examines the qualities of community leadership and the many paths and forms it can take. I'm your host, Matt Lehrman. Amidst the turmoil of the COVID-19 pandemic, when people were retreating from all sorts of in-person gatherings, my guest, Eugene Carr, sparked a remarkable idea. He envisioned activating the too quiet downtown streets of his Western Massachusetts hometown, Great Barrington, which is situated, as they say, in the bosom of the Berkshire Mountains. He created Berkshire Busk, a series of live street performances strategically spaced apart and adhering to social distancing guidelines that offered both residents and visitors the opportunity to return to the joy of live entertainment, revive downtown commerce, and foster a sense of community togetherness in a safe and secure environment. If you're not familiar with the word, busking is the act of performing music or entertainment in a public place, typically for voluntary donations from passers-by. The performers are called buskers. I'm especially excited to sit down with Gene because his experience demonstrates that being a community catalyst doesn't depend on having an official title. It's about having a compelling vision and the capability to communicate and coordinate among many stakeholders. His story holds valuable lessons for the potential of all individuals to drive positive change in their communities. What you should also know about Eugene Carr is that he's a successful entrepreneur, a talented musician, a cellist, and since the dawn of the internet age, one of the nation's foremost innovators in arts and cultural marketing. He is also one of my oldest and dearest friends. Eugene Carr, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so very much.
Hey, Gene, we have listeners who may not be familiar with Western Massachusetts beyond the line in Sweet Baby James where James Taylor sings, "The Berkshires seem dreamlike on account of that frosting." So take a moment right now and just describe what it is that attracted you to Great Barrington and why the region is so popular, especially during the summer.
Sure. This area of the Berkshires, which is basically the southwest corner of the Berkshires, has, for a variety of reasons, a combination of cultural organizations, all situated, I would say, between sort of 20 and 30 minutes from each other. Probably the anchor in this area is something called Tanglewood, which is the summer home of the Boston Symphony. In essence, in every summer, the entire Boston Symphony moves itself to Western Massachusetts, where it situates to do a summer-long festival. And what's happened is that you now have a theater company, you've got Shakespeare and Company, you've got several Berkshire area theater companies, you've got probably the country's leading modern dance festival called Jacob's Pillow. You've got other kinds of performing organizations, and you've got a absolutely remarkable physical area. So there's natural beauty, there's cultural activity, which of course brings tourism as well as people wanting to live here year round. So it's this combination of things that makes this area really special. It also doesn't hurt that it's sort of 2.5 hours from New York, 2 hours and some from Boston. It's an hour from Albany.
So Gene, take us back. The pandemic took hold around, March of 2020.
Yep.
And you launched Berkshire Busk in time for the summer of 2021, so about 15 months later. Talk about what was your inspiration and when was your inspiration to bring live street performances to Great Barrington?
Because I'm a musician, I got invited to kind of sit in and play in some jazz bands up in this area. I became friendly with some musicians. Now, that very first summer, as everybody remembers, was kind of bleak. I mean, people have to remember, there was no vaccines. So people were scared to be outside. They were scared to be with each other. All the restaurants were closed. All the cultural organizations that I just told you about, they were all shut. There was nothing happening. But another entrepreneur, a real estate owner who owned some buildings in downtown Great Barrington, was kind of innovative, and he owned the movie theater in right downtown in Great Barrington. And in front of the movie theater was a parking lot, and he kind of scratched at his head and said, wait a minute, this is crazy. Let's get rid of the parking lot and put tables and chairs and let people congregate, get takeout food from restaurants and sit in this area. And so what happened is that he then enabled some live music to take place right there in that little courtyard. And I was lucky enough to be invited to play one of those nights. And so there I was, the sun was setting. It was a beautiful 72 degrees, sunny, breezy. There were people sitting outside. I was sitting in this band playing. People were singing. It was glorious at a time that could not have been anything less than not glorious. And I thought at that moment, my goodness, what a great thing this is for the community to get people together. So that was the inspiration. And at the end of that summer, I sat down, getting a little ahead of myself, but I sat down with the town manager. And I said, listen, if this COVID thing is around next summer and we've got this same scenario, I've got this wacky idea that we could do more of this and in an organized way, not just a haphazard real estate owner says, hey, why don't you try something? What if we really organized it? So that was kind of how that happened.
Was talking to the town manager the first thing that you did?
Yes.
How did that process play out?
Yeah, so I want to back up and say that this entire festival wouldn't have happened at all, and I wouldn't have lifted a finger to do it if it weren't for the town manager. Now, in the Great Barrington, we have a select board. We don't have a mayor. We have a town manager. And this town manager is a forward-thinking, easy to work with guy whose vision about his job is he's in the business of clearing barriers. He's in the business of making things happen. And I didn't think that was the kind of job description for a town manager. I thought town managers were there to enforce the rules and to tell you to go into, solve this problem and fix. I thought his job was to fill out this form and meet with this committee. So at the end of August that summer, I invited him for a coffee and we sat down. I remember it was Labor Day weekend and we sat down at the end of August and I said, listen, I have this idea. What do you think? And I was fully expecting him to say all of the reasons why it wouldn't work. You're going to have this problem and this board and the insurance and all. And in fact, he said, Gene, I think it's a great idea. You should just do it. And at that point, sort of like a chemical reaction happens when you put two chemicals together in a cauldron. When the town manager says you should do it, meets up with an entrepreneur who knows how to get things done, he sort of opened the door. So what I did was, that was the first step, is that he basically gave me permission. And he basically said what I told you, which is, I will help you knock down the inevitable barriers that you're going to encounter, but I'm on your side. I'm here to help you make this happen. You let me know how I can help you.
If his reaction had been anything other, if he had said, oh, there's a lot of hurdles you're going to have to overcome, Gene, because you got insurance, you got logistics, you got all the stakeholders and the approvals that are necessary, would that have been the end of the idea right then and there?
I think it would have been a matter of degree. I think that I would have said, if you and I in that conversation and you had given me all those comments, I think I would have said, look, are you going to put the wind at my back? And are you going to help me through this? And if the answer was, you're on your own, look, this town is a difficult place and there's a lot of committees and I'm just a town manager, I don't have much control and good luck to you. That's one answer. But I didn't get that answer. The answer I got was, I'm here to help you make something happen. You let me know how you can help. And so I heard that I had an advocate from day one. I'm kind of tenacious. So if he had said it's going to be difficult, I probably would have said, sure, everything's difficult, but are you going to be my ally? And as soon as I understood I had an ally, that's when I decided, okay, well, this is something I want to pursue.
Okay, so pick up the story from there. Because as I'm listening to you now, I'm wondering if you have a chicken and egg question, which is, so you have an ally, that's great. But which do you pursue first? Do you go and figure out how do you get all the approvals and permissions necessary to do this? Or do you have to go out and find funding to see how you actually make this feasible? What's your process?
Yeah, so like every entrepreneurial enterprise, the thing that most people don't think about as much as they should, and the thing that makes something work or not work, is all about the money. You can have the greatest idea in the world, but if you don't have the money, it's not going to go. So I immediately said, okay, let me figure out what is this going to cost and where am I going to get the money? And I knew, given the way municipalities work, that in August of that year, there was no way that I could possibly marshal all of the wheels of government to put together a budget that was going to be made available to me from the town in time for the next summer. That was clear. So I quickly realized that the only way this was going to work is if I marshaled the support of the community. And by the community, I mean the business community, and went to business leaders and said, look, I want to do this festival. And if you care about the town, are you willing to invest in the form of a donation to help this festival actually get off the ground? And so my first question to that town manager was, who are the movers and shakers in this town that I need to talk to who are likely to be open-minded and entrepreneurial? Now, I kind of, having lived in Great Barrington, I kind of knew some of those people already. But I put together a list, and then I started literally knocking on Zoom call doors because there was no knocking on actual doors. And I had Zoom call after Zoom call, and I just presented I should tell you, I put together kind of a PowerPoint presentation.
I was wondering if there was going to be a PowerPoint in here. By the way, Gene, that's advice that you gave me years ago. Right? Create a PowerPoint presentation to tell the story as clearly and quickly as possible.
So that's what I did. And not only that, I got, at the time, there was a dancer in the Berkshires who was teaching a modern dance class. And I had met her through some friends, and I hired her to go to all of the busking locations that we had imagined and to stand in front of each of the locations and pose. And I did a couple of pictures, and I'm like, here, we're going to do it over here, and we're going to have somebody here, we're going to have somebody here. So when I did the presentation and I showed it to people, they could actually envision, oh, it's going to be in front of the hardware store. Great. Oh, you're going to have it in front of town hall. So we put together a presentation, and I basically, that was sort of the next goalpost, if you will. First was the town manager. Second was, are there going to be enough companies and businesses that are going to support the festival? And at that point, I realized, okay, we've got to put together not only a budget, but we've got to put together a sponsorship package. Gold, silver, bronze sponsorships. What do you get as a sponsor? What kind of recognition we put together? And I just followed the playbook that every sponsorship organization has, whether you're a music festival or any kind of festival. Everybody's seen this all over. There's sponsorships, and you pay more for more visibility. So I invented that whole thing for this festival and said, here are the sponsorship levels. Are you willing to commit?
So, Gene, I want to get a little bit nitty gritty here. I want to hear about some of the initial hurdles that you did have to overcome. It's great that the town manager was supportive. You found some financial support. Where were the hurdles? Approvals, logistics, neighbors? What were the challenges that you first faced?
I would say that we largely didn't have any major resistance. Partially at the beginning, partially because no one really knew what I was up to. I would say there was a healthy amount of skepticism amongst some who thought it was going to happen at all. And so I was actually able to operate kind of under the radar for a while. So the challenges were mostly purely entrepreneurial, which is, oh my goodness, I have to put together a fundraising operation. So if you ask, well, what were the hurdles? The hurdles were just me and my time. I mean, some of my friends will attest to this. Like, I was waking up at 5:30 in the morning because I'm like, worried that there was so much to do that the dates weren't going to change, like the festival was going to start. So there weren't a lot of hurdles at the beginning. It was mostly, how in the world are we going to be able to pull this off? But there weren't that many barriers. Nobody was giving us a hassle during and I will say, and this goes to the community part, the town manager said, if you do this on town property, I will extend the town's insurance policy to cover what you are doing. That was huge. That was huge. And by the way, Gene, you have to go in front of the select board and you have to get them to agree to do this. So of course I had to get the sort of the town leaders to agree that we could do this festival. But and then by the way, the fire department and the police department could not have been more helpful, because it really, and this comes from leadership. The town manager said, we want to give this guy a chance to try to create this. Let's help him. And he introduced me. He opened the door to the fire department. He opened the door. And for instance, there's a church on Main Street that has a beautiful lawn. And we had a couple of performers that do aerial performing. So they set up this rig that's 10 feet high, and they do this thing with the ropes where you've probably seen it on TV or whatever. They're hanging off the ropes and they're doing tricks. Well, we needed a place that had a soft landing. And so this church has a lawn. So I went to the church and I said, would you be open to, this is not town property, would you be able? And they said, sure, if the town will cover the insurance, we're on. So the town collaborated and they said, sure, we'll do it. So the town really knocked down the barriers the way they said, and then we were off and running.
I really want to go deeper on this point, Gene, because a lot of our listeners are people who are elected and appointed or staff leaders of cities and towns all over the country. So if you're speaking to them directly, what advice do you give to them about how to receive someone like you in their own community who has a vision but doesn't quite know how to make the process work?
Yeah, I think yes, that's a great question. I think the first and foremost is that if somebody has an idea and they have the gumption to approach you and to come downtown and have a meeting with you and say, I've got this idea, recognize the sheer act of walking in your office and saying, I'd like to make something happen, that needs to be honored and supported. Of course, towns and municipalities have rules and regulations and committees and all that stuff. But the first thing that somebody with an idea coming to you, they need to hear is, thanks. I really like your idea. Let's talk about how we can help you make it happen. It's because you just need the spark. You need somebody to put the wind at your back.
You're saying it's really it's easy for someone in an official capacity to quash the aspirations of someone who comes to them. I think the word you used earlier was that the town manager was on your side, that he was an ally. And because he was an ally, it wasn't a guarantee that you were going to be able to realize this thing, but at least you knew that you weren't working opposite of this influential person's intentions.
Yes, and that's correct. And I also believe that projects like this are, by their very nature, they're entrepreneurial, which means that, I've thought a lot about how could other towns do a busking festival like we've created? Is it possible? And I guess I came to the conclusion that these kinds of festivals are unlikely to spring from and within an administration of an existing town and municipality. It's more likely that an individual in the community is going to come and approach the town and say, I want to make this happen. And if that's the case, that individual has to feel supported, because they're creating an idea out of nothing, and they're suddenly going to take, as I did, this huge project on their shoulders. And so I think it's the job of the town manager to kind of be open, be willing to support the person. Obviously, look, I will say as a caveat, you as the town manager need to, not all ideas are going to be great. and not all ideas are going to be feasible. And if it's a wacky idea that has no chance of happening, you may need to guide that person. But if the germ of an idea is there, I would just say a little bit of encouragement at the very beginning goes a long way.
Gene, what you just said is music to my ears, because what you're saying is that a project like this requires a community catalyst, someone to make this happen, but that comes, you said, from outside the administration of the town. Why does it have to come from outside the town?
The reason that I say it is that it's probably in nobody's job description right now to make a festival happen. Now, it's possible in some communities that you do have a director of community affairs who says, boy, actually, this does fit my job description, and boy, wouldn't this be a great idea? But I'm going to guess that that person is busy and they're juggling 6 other jobs, and they might wake up in the morning and say, boy, this would be a great place, but I'm already super busy and I can't take this on with my current staff.
I want to throw a different idea at you. I understand what you're saying, but I think there's a different reason why it requires a community catalyst who comes from outside. And I suspect it has something to do with risk tolerance. As an entrepreneur, you understand the nature of risk, and you understand how to insure yourself against that risk by finding the support, by finding the finances that you need to support it. Someone who is in the system, elected, appointed, or whatever, their tolerance for risk, their ability to go out on a limb seems a lot more limited than someone who comes from the outside. Does that resonate for you?
Completely and 100%. That describes in many ways kind of the nature of who an entrepreneur is and the nature of people that are in jobs that are worthy and pay them a salary, but their decision-making about taking that job does not include the word risk at the top of the food chain. Whereas entrepreneurs, the word risk is the very first thing we think about. So, risk is part of any job, but in the entrepreneur world, you start with risk and then you move down the chain, whereas other people that have full-time jobs say, wait a minute.
They start with stability.
Right. So I agree. I completely agree with that assessment.
So, Gene, earlier I asked you if you had advice for the city officials on how to receive someone like you. Let me also ask you, what advice do you have for the person who's listening to this, who in their own community thinks they have an idea for something that could be good? It doesn't have to be a music festival. It could be anything that they want. What's your advice to them? And I want you to add to the equation that perhaps they don't think of themselves as an entrepreneur like you think of yourself as an entrepreneur. What advice do you give to them?
First of all, remember that not all ideas are great. Some may be great, some may not be great. What I would encourage you to do when you have an idea for a thing, whatever it is to immediately start talking with a wide array of people and just sort of using the metaphor, throw it against the wall. Go sit down with people and say, I've been thinking about, we ought to have a parade on Labor Day, or we ought to have whatever your idea is, and get the feedback. Don't only go to people go to people that eventually, and before you go pitch the idea for money, go pitch the idea for advice. Go sit down with people and say, I'm thinking about this idea. What do you think? Because what's going to happen is if you get enough positive responses, if you go talk to 3, 4, 5 people and they say to you, oh my God, that's a great idea, you should really do it, you will do it. You will do it because their energy is going to come back to you, and you're going to go home at night and you're going to say, you know what? All of those people think it's a great idea. This must be a good idea. Now, if on the flip side, you get lots of negatives, pay attention to that because you're going to be fighting those negatives all the way through. So don't be afraid to throw ideas out there, get feedback from your friends and from the community. That will motivate you and energize you.
This is literally the definition of a catalyst, right? You share your idea with someone, you excite them about it, then they are on your team, and you get to build the great ideas together.
100% right. And speaking now, bringing together the conversation about the town manager, when you do sit down with the town officials, the great thing is you can say, I've talked to these 10 people and they're all on my side. And they all said, well, this one would help me and this one would help me and this one's going to throw it. And that makes the town manager much more confident, number one, that you could pull it off. And it gives the town managers some fuel for their own internal battles that they have to fight internally to make something happen, because the town manager is going to go to the head of the Department of Public Works. And the DPW is going to say, well, we've got this road and blah, blah, blah. And they're going to say, yeah, but look, they've already got the support of these 5 people. So your proselytizing, if you will, your catalyzing the community will help you in getting something done at the town level.
So I want to advance from the first year of putting this together to where you are now. You said you're coming into the 4th season of producing Berkshire Busk. You know so much about what's going on in the arts and cultural community all over the country. There's museums and performing arts centers and all kinds of institutions that do this. Here, you've just had this incredibly vivid and well-received experience of bringing arts experiences out onto the streets for people to experience. Is that something that you could conceive needs to be happening in more places around the country?
Absolutely. I think in the cities where you have a large installed base of community organizations, Chicago and New York and Seattle and Dallas, where you've got buildings and infrastructure, there's a lot going on. But there are hundreds and hundreds of small and middle-sized towns we have our catchment area here is 20,000 people. Think about, I would venture that there is the opportunity for towns all over the country to do something like this and have similar results. Now, the performers are not going to be the same, but I will bet you that you will find performers coming out of the woodwork in every nook and cranny of the country. It'll be different. But people are willing and interested to perform for their neighbors. There are companies that are willing to. I think it's a model that could be replicated. I don't think it's as urgent in New York City. The New York Philharmonic performs in Central Park. You don't need this in New York City, but in Poughkeepsie, you might. And there are some towns where this does happen naturally. Ithaca, New York is one of them. In Burlington, there's another. But man, there is a huge opportunity to do this all over the country.
Is there anything else about Berkshire Busk that I haven't asked you about that you want to make sure that community leaders or community activists should know about? Some lesson they should take from your experience that would be useful in their work?
Honestly, I think that we've covered pretty much all of it. I would just say that I've gotten realistic over the years in understanding the limitations of what government can do and how quickly government can do it. And I've become more convinced than ever that it just takes individuals to make a festival like this happen. Again, the catalysts thing that we talked about, that you can't expect a community that is complicated and has really deep-seated problems to somehow or other become an entrepreneur, right? That's asking too much of the community. What you can do is you can ask the community to put the wind at the back of individuals that come to you and say, I want to help make this community better. Please help me do that. And so the biggest message here is to sort of, for the town managers, is to be open and helpful and for the entrepreneurs or the individuals who are listening to this to not get rose-colored glasses and say, I've got this great idea. I'm going to approach the town, and it's such a good idea. The town should fund it. Because you know what? They're not going to fund it. They're busy and they have problems that are so deep and complicated that you're not going to wedge yourself in and suddenly get money pried out of your community. It's just not going to happen. Might happen in 5 or 10 years, but at the beginning, it's going to take individuals that make a difference. And that's really kind of the message that we've been telling each other for the last hour.
Gene, I want to conclude with some lightning round questions for you. So very short answers.
All right.
Eugene Carr, what's the most impactful leadership advice you've ever received?
The idea is worth 5%. The execution is worth 95%. Mostly, it's just hard work.
Gene, how do you recharge yourself, especially during challenging times?
That's a great question. I guess I would say that I have a pretty good circle of close friends who know me well. And when I hit a brick wall, I call them. And most of the time, they talk me off the ledge. And that isn't all that frequent. But, have people in your midst who you can reach out to when the going gets rough, who can pump you up.
Gene, tell me something that you wish you understood better before you ever started the Berkshire Busk project.
I would say that I wish that I understood the complexity of putting together a festival like this more than I did. I completely underestimated the complexity of booking 100 performers and coordinating. Like, it just was a whole lot more work than I thought it was. I'm like, oh, whip, 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 I'll just get it done. So, but then again, I'm going to say that actually is a through line for my whole life, because most of the time I underestimate how hard things are going to be. And if I actually thought about it, I probably wouldn't do it.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't believe you on this one, because if you knew how hard it was going to be, that might have dissuaded you from doing it in the first place.
It's an internal conversation. I allow myself to think that it's less work than it's going to be. And then when I get into it, then it's just grit. It's like I answered your first question, just do the work.
I said in your introduction that you are a talented and accomplished cellist. I want to know, have you performed at your own Berkshire Busk?
That's a tough question. The truth is, the answer is not yet. I was supposed to perform last year. Most of the years, I'm just too busy. I'm running around, I'm running the staff. I was supposed to perform last year, and the band that I was performing in had to cancel at the last minute. So I didn't end up performing, but it's going to happen.
Physician, heal thyself. Musician, play thyself. Hey, Gene, I ask this question of a lot of people. We live in incredibly divisive times. What gives you hope for the future?
What I've observed in this festival that I don't think I fully anticipated is the number of people that can come up to us unsolicited and say, I really love this festival. I really love this festival because it's a wonderful place where I can come in the evening with my kids in a safe environment. I can see my friends and I don't have to have a ticket. I can just come down. We've lost in our world this notion of community gathering. Now, it's been replaced by rock concerts, been replaced by shopping, it's been replaced. But this notion of people coming together in a casual way, in an unstructured way where they just run into each other and see each other. We have that here in Great Barrington in the form of a farmer's market, and a lot of towns have that. Well, this is the same kind of vibe. And what gives me hope is that, people want community. They do. They want to be with their neighbors. They don't want to discuss politics. They don't want to fight with each other over a parking spot. They want to just enjoy each other's company. And if you create like a canvas, if you create this opportunity for them to come together, they will do it. And I think there's a lot of healing that can go on when this kind of activity takes place.
Gene Carr, you've created a stage upon which your community is coming together and celebrating each other. And that's a beautiful thing.
Thank you. I'll echo and say this summer, we're actually creating a tagline for Berkshire Busk. We didn't ever do that, but our tagline is, the sidewalk is our stage. That's what busking is all about, where the sidewalk is our stage. And so that's what we've done.
Gene Carr, it's been great to speak with you. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and expertise.
I was delighted. Thanks.
Again, my sincere thanks and appreciation to Eugene Carr of Berkshire Busk. I've placed a link to this summer's event information in the program notes. As Gene said, it's taking place Fridays and Saturdays from June 28th through Labor Day. This episode was produced by Kerry Lengel and edited by Nick Living the Dream Tantillo. Jenna Maisel is our production assistant. Our executive producer is John Little. I'm Matt Lehrman of Social Prosperity Partners. If you have a question, comment, or a story to share, reach me at 602-688-2724 or podcast at socialprosperity.us. I'd love to hear from you. We'll be back soon with another Community Catalyst.